Well, good evening, and I want to welcome you to Kokoro Live. My name's Alex Lang. I'm here with my friend Lee Bruce. Thank you for being here with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
And we got a good show for you tonight. We're going to be talking about the concept of how our environment shapes who we are as people. And I think we got a good conversation coming up with that. I do want to point out before we get started, though, that I hope you've been keeping up with the Kokoro conversations that we've been doing. Rebecca and I have been doing those conversations every week. We got a good one coming up this Saturday. It's about triggers, like how people trigger you, right? So it's the things you do. So what's fun about that one is I brought to the conversation. I brought actual like pictures for her, and she was like, this is like exposure therapy. Because I was like, I'd like pick it up and I'd show her a photo, and I'd be like, what is this? What is this? So it's all the stuff that I thought was triggering to her. So we talked about it. She also a lot of her triggers are my triggers too. So that's how it went. So anyways, it's I think it's one of the best ones we've done so far. I hope that you'll take a look at it when you have an opportunity. And tonight, as we're talking about environment, I'm going to be posing questions. Please, if you want to, would love to hear your reflections in the chat. If you're there, we have that up, so we can answer questions along the way. And I just appreciate you all being here tonight and being a part of this community here. So, Lee, let's start off because I think it's important for us to dive into this idea of environments kind of shaping who we are. So tell us a little bit about how you grew up. Like, tell us about the environment in which you grew up, because I think that's important for us.
Always important. So I grew up in the far south side of Chicago. You know, community is called Argyle Gardens. Lived there for about 11 years. And from there, moved. At that time, it wasn't as bad as it is now.
Yeah.
From there, we moved into the Roseland area, which is a little bit north of there. Same thing. It's peaceful. It was, you as a kid, you can play in the streets without worrying about, anything happening to you. Anybody coming out shooting you.
And are you the oldest, middle?
I am the youngest of my mother's children, youngest of 5.
Okay, so
and father's a different story. Father was a Rolling Stone.
But you're the youngest of 5.
Youngest of 5.
And like describe so it sounds like it's a decent place to grow up. Very nice. In some ways, like you can go out and enjoy and play and do all those things. What was so I want to kind of differentiate. So we have like outdoor environment, indoor environment. So talk a little bit more about outdoor, and then we'll go to indoor. So tell me a little bit more about what it was like just being out in the world with the people who you spent time with.
Being out in the world back then, it was fun. You went to school. You loved to go to school because I know you remember the little cartoon Family Circus.
Absolutely, yeah.
How you had little Billy, mother give him a chore to do, and he takes the chore and he goes around the neighborhood and he plays in the playground before he actually gets to the store. Hopefully he remembers what he was supposed to bought at the store,
right,
and then come back home. Well, that's kind of how it was back then. You get out of school, you're supposed to go home, but you don't go home. You go to the candy store, and then you go hang out with your friends for a little bit, and then you eventually find your way back home before your mother or father gets home. That's how it was for me.
So it sounds like it's a nice community. It sounds like you knew a lot of people. People knew you. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you felt welcome.
Felt welcome, felt at ease, Everybody, it was a community. That old saying, it takes a village.
Yeah.
We had a village. Whether you saw that village or not, you as a child, you were always being watched to make sure nothing happened to you.
Okay. So it was almost like you had a lot of mothers and fathers on top of your own.
Most definitely.
So that's external world kind of, and now we're talking about when you're a kid, right? So this is when you're a kid.
I'm a kid.
So what's indoor life like for you? You get home, you come back in. Describe what it's like being indoors now.
Indoor, it was loving. We didn't have any problems. Other than the sibling rivalry or whatever. It was I was more of a observer because the age difference between me and my oldest sister, it's 14 years. So it's like 14, 12, 10, then 4.
Wow.
So living in that house, I was pretty much, just a follower
Yeah.
for the other ones, but they didn't really let me follow them.
Yeah.
You know, I was a nuisance because I was this itty bitty girl, and they're already, you know, in teenage years. So
Yeah.
I didn't really have a buddy until my nephew Robert came along.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so then he was my little sidekick. He was my little nephew brother.
So with that many kids, were resources ever an issue,
Nope.
or you guys you guys were good? You had the money to be able to do
Yeah.
things, because sometimes I was just interviewing a friend of mine who grew up in a family of 11, and he talked about how sometimes like a lot of his friends, he, along with his siblings, he would call them his friends, they would have to go out and work just to pay the mortgage. So it was like it was hard being with that many kids and then feeding everybody. It was just a lot. So it sounds like you didn't have to deal with that.
Yeah,
You
no.
never had to worry about food.
Nope.
None of that.
My mother worked. She's always so. Growing up, my mother worked at a hotel. Back then, it was called the Richmond, and you can just say this was a family hotel because my mother was the executive housekeeper, which is now the head housekeeper. You know, and under my mother, you had my grandmother worked under her, had my aunts, my sisters.
So really, it was a whole family thing.
A family thing. So they all worked at this one
and it
hotel.
sounds like they treated her well.
Yeah. So with my grandmother, it was funny because she told my mother, "In here, you're my boss. Well, when we step out that door, I'm the boss." So they had that kind of love relationship.
Yeah. So okay. So talk a little bit about what it was like for you to go to school. Like how did school impact you? So you're a kid, you're growing up. Sounds like you got community, you got your siblings who maybe aren't necessarily wanting you to do much with them, but they're there.
Yeah.
And so what's school like? Explain school.
School, I was always quiet. I was quiet, little itty bitty girl, but they knew not to mess with me because I was crazy. At least that's what they told me, but I was quiet. I just observed. I was into sports.
Yeah.
I like softball and basketball.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I was a point guard in high school, but that's a different story, different topic.
Well, we'll get to that. So yeah, we're good. So you excelled in sports. Well, did people notice that you were intelligent?
Yeah, they did.
From an early age.
They did. They did.
And that was encouraged.
It was, and even like with some of my teachers, I had a couple of teachers that I had a computer teacher. Her name is Patricia Bailey. We connected. I became like her surrogate, daughter.
Yeah.
Then I had my English teacher. No, she was social studies. Her name was Jelena Whitehead.
And she noticed that you were...
She noticed. She took me under her wing. With her, we excelled in many things. We had many adventures.
So it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, from a young age, they kind of... So you have your family, you have all these kids, you have a community. The schools are recognizing that you have intelligence. You're getting people who are encouraging you. You're good at sports.
Yep.
Right? So how did that you're going along trying to do your thing, right?
Right.
How does that compare with maybe other people who you were around? Because I mean, we all know not everybody's going to be as smart or as motivated or as talented as you are. And what did you see in your life as you started to get older? How did watching your friends and your siblings start to take their own paths, how did that impact you?
It depends. Like, there was this young man, his name was Edward. We were like frickin' frack is when it came to sports in 8th grade. Like, he was number one male version, of sportsmen's, and I was, the female. And at a young age, his life was taken, violently. I don't know the details and probably wouldn't discuss the details, but just to know how he wasn't a troublemaker.
How old was he?
He was about 14, 15.
Wow.
And he didn't live that, that gang-banging life.
Yeah.
And to see somebody like that, and whose life is taken down, just destroyed
For
for
no
probably, misunderstanding.
Yeah.
It's just senseless. And it's hard when you're that young, not really understanding what's going on, but you're around that. You
Yeah, so in your community, was that the kind of, was that danger close by? Or was that on the periphery of your community? And then it would kind of come in every so often?
Yeah.
Is that what would happen?
Yeah, it was on the peripheral.
Yeah.
The communities that I lived in, they had a reputation,
Yeah.
but where I lived, it was, you would have thought it was like the suburbs.
Right.
It was quiet.
It was quiet and nice. So you only got little snippets of it, it sounds like.
Right. I wasn't deep into it.
Yeah. So when you went to school, I think that has to have been, because high school, I feel like, and I don't know if you agree with me, right? But I feel like high school is a very interesting time for a lot of teenagers, because it's where, I feel like in elementary school, the teachers say, you can be anything you want, right? Anything you want, you can be it.
It was.
And that's what everybody says, and then you say, oh yeah, I believe that, right? And then middle school, things start to jostle a little bit, and you start to tell, oh, well, maybe I can't be anything I want. And then by high school, you start to realize, actually, there are a lot of really different tracks that people are going down, and they're making decisions that are solidifying things that are going to follow them for the rest of their life, oftentimes.
Exactly.
And it's not, and I'm not saying that you can't change. People could change. But what I noticed was there were a lot of people who were starting to make decisions in high school that then, in some ways, I don't want to say it totally predetermined, but it did. It predetermined a lot of what they would end up doing later on in their life. So I assume you saw the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, what did you see? I'm interested. So you're intelligent. You're doing well in school. Like you're a person who has drive and motivation. And are you seeing people around you? I mean, I know I certainly did. Who lack that, and how did that impact you?
It impacted me in a way that made me, I just felt like I needed to do better. I'm seeing what they're going through, and it's not something that I, want to go through. I don't want to experience it. Just visually seeing the path that they might be going down.
Yeah.
That's why when I told you earlier, I was always in the backfield. I was observer.
Yeah.
So I always stepped back and just watch what everybody else was doing, because if I felt that you were doing something that was going to end badly,
you'd walk away.
I'm walking away.
Now, being quiet, that didn't make you a target?
It only took one time.
I mean, that's right. You had that crazy reputation.
Yeah, it only took one time. It's like after that, it was people would come to me and it was like, "How you doing? You okay?"
Yeah.
Like, I'm good.
So, I mean, so were you 14 when your friend was killed? Were you 14, 15 around that time? What did that do to you? You're an observer. It's, you realize, it sounds like part of what you realized was you're watching and you're saying to yourself, oh, if they're going to do something, they're going down a path, I'm going to step back from that. And it sounds like you made an active decision to do that in your life.
Yeah.
That you weren't necessarily going to go along with riffraff, yeah?
No.
All right. So did you have friends who you were close to who ended up making the opposite decisions?
I did.
And how did you deal with that? Because I think because I have friends like that too who did the same thing. So I'm interested to know how that shaped your feelings of yourself, because you get left behind when they go, they're going to go off, they're going to do their thing, and you could sit there and judge it and say, oh, I don't know if I agree with that.
Right. But for me, I kept you, you wasn't right here. You wasn't really in my presence. I kept track of you.
Yeah.
We stayed in touch, in contact, but I wasn't necessarily in your circle anymore.
So you were willing. So I think this is an interesting thing, and I'm interested to know if any of you are watching right now, because what it means is, so you were willing to act independently. Mm-hmm. And I think that may be something you and I have in common in this way, that we are both willing to be independent.
Right.
Because I think that's hard for a lot of people.
It is.
I think that's hard for a lot of people to say, okay, I'm going to make an independent decision, and I'm okay with not going down that road, and I'm okay being left out and feeling left out, because you still, even if you know they're making stupid decisions,
Right.
you still feel left out, right?
You can, but it just depends on how you take it.
Right.
Like, let's just say it's 12 o'clock at night and you and your friends, they're like, oh, come on, let's go make this little store run or whatever.
Yeah.
I ain't going out there, it's dark. You know what I mean? So it's a judgment call.
Right.
They can do what they want to do, because all good things are not good things for most people.
Yeah.
It's good for one, but not for the next. And doing stuff like that, it just wasn't good for me, because I didn't.
What good was going to come of it? You're like,
Right.
I can wait till 8 in the morning.
What good was going to come out of it? And I had a mother that didn't play.
Right.
So I learned my independence from her, because like you asked me earlier about, did we need anything? No, because she provided for us.
Yeah.
And then she put that work, instilled that work, environment in my siblings. So everything was taken care of.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting because, if any of you, I'm interested to know, were any of you who are watching this, did you ever feel the desire or the pull to, in the environment that you were in, to end up making decisions that were against your better judgment? Because I think that's an important thing to ask. If that is something that happened, I would love to know what it was that you did, or how you were feeling about it, and why you made the decision that you made. For me, so I lived in a small little town in Virginia, very sleepy, right? And so, you could walk around at night and that was fine and nothing was going to happen to you. But there were places where you could get into a lot of trouble if you wanted to. And I think, and I'm interested to know about this with your growing up. So what I noticed in my town, and I think this is just true of the culture of the small town of Virginia, and I think it's true of Virginia generally, which is that it was a very heavy drinking culture. Very heavy drinking. So from the time, basically, I would say from probably our sophomore year going onward, most of my class was drinking, and they weren't just drinking; they were binge drinking. And then by junior and senior year, that's where a lot of drugs started to really come into play. And so I watched a lot of my peers start to experiment heavily with drugs. Some got into opioids. Like, I was actually looking through some pictures recently of my wife went back home and actually took some of the photos. She took them out of my old drawer and brought them back here. And we were looking through, and I was like, oh gosh, that guy had an opioid addiction later. That guy actually died from an opioid overdose. Wow. So, like, there were people who, like, drugs are a big part of the culture of where I'm from. And I think that had to me, there was a point in time at which I had to make a decision that I was like, I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to go down that road.
Right.
And that isolated me. I went from having decent amount of friends to, like, I had one guy who would hang out with me, one dude who was my friend at that point, which was hard because it was isolating.
Right.
And it felt like nobody really wanted to, because I was making a decision, a stance to say, this is something I don't really want to do. I felt like I was pushed out. So, but making that, so loneliness, when you feel lonely, it hurts. Like, there's a physical pain that goes with that, right? So, but I was like, I would rather be an individual and choose to make those decisions, because I could see in my mind, I was always asking the question, all right, if I go out and I go to this party and the cops come, what's going to happen to me possibly being able to go to college, even though I'm not drinking or anything, right?
Right.
But
it's the environment.
But I'm there, right? Yeah, right. Absolutely. I'm in that environment. I think it makes me think, because so many people I know would get caught up in, they were driving with a friend, and their friend had weed in the car.
That's it.
And that was it. And then
everybody going to jail.
And then they get this, and that happened so many times to guys I knew. I'm like, why? Why would you do that? But that was just the way they did things.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you have stories like that with people who made decisions that way.
Well, I personally have not made any of those decisions.
No. But I'm saying you have stories of friends who probably made similar types of decisions, yes?
I do, most definitely.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that it becomes this interesting question, right? So it sounds like your mom it sounds like she was strict to a degree. Is that true?
Not really strict. It's
That's
just
but high expectations for you?
yeah.
Okay.
She had just the best expectations.
Okay. So she laid those expectations out and you followed them, which is not always the case, right?
Nope.
So sometimes you can lay out high expectations and it doesn't necessarily work out, right?
Right.
And the kids rebel.
Yeah, I mean, my mother laid out expectations that she didn't even verbally express.
Yeah.
You know, it was just me. Like I said, I watched my siblings.
Right.
So if he's doing this, and this is what he gets from doing that, I know not to do that.
You understand consequence.
I understand all of that.
Yeah. So I mean, and I think that's something that's really interesting, right? Is that, and probably this is why you and I see eye to eye on so many things, is because to me, I always think about what is the consequence of something before I do it.
Right.
Right. Like I'm always thinking about that. I've found that a lot of people don't think that way. That a lot of people do not think about consequence before they make the decision. But I think that there's something. So I'm very similar to you in the sense that I was a watcher for sure. Like if you'd met me in high school, you would have been like, that guy talked 3 words the entire time we were in high school together.
We'd probably been on the opposite ends of the corner.
Yeah, we would have just been like staring.
Like, get in trouble. She ain't gonna make it home tonight. She gonna end up in somebody's house. Yeah.
So because I was an observer, it was just easier to be quiet, easier, and I was thinking through that. Why do you think? And I think this is interesting. You clearly you care about. You observe. You're watching, you're anticipating consequence. That environment, right? You're growing up. It sounds like similar to me. It's just it's a little bit of a different kind of town. You're in a city. I'm in a town, right? But you're watching probably a lot of people who are not thinking through the consequences when you're young, right? They're just making decisions because it feels good to make the decision.
They think that they're part of the in crowd because they're doing this. They're taking part of it.
So I think that raises an interesting question, which is, why do you think that so many people who grow up in good environments end up making bad decisions? Why do you think that happens? Because it sounds like you and I, for the most part, had decent environments that were kind of nurturing. We had our basic needs taken care of, right?
Right.
And we were able to make good decisions for ourselves because we waited. But why is it there's a lot of people who grow up in good environments and then they end up making bad decisions? And we'll get to the bad environments and the bad decisions. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about good environments, bad decisions. Why do you think that happens?
Sometimes it's the excitement, It's the thrill.
Yeah.
It's the what if,
Yeah.
So they make those decisions because they want to just have the experience. Like, let me see how it feels. Let me experience my adrenaline just rushing.
Yeah.
I want that
I'm
rush.
gonna do something a little bad.
Want to be a rebel for a moment.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't end well for them, but they want that feel.
Yeah.
At least once. But sometimes when they get that feel once, they got to have it all the time.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes it's not a good thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that impulse, for acceptance, that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And it's unusual to be somebody who's willing to be on the outside and to be an individual. I remember my dad one time, he said, he goes, I know for you, Alex, you think that just, he goes, I watched you. You will make a decision and you will follow through with that. Once you make a decision. He goes, most people don't work that way. He's like, most people, they can't make a decision and follow through with it. It's very hard for them to do, particularly if it's something that requires work and effort and it's challenging, right? Now, if it's an easy decision,
like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Like if I know it's gonna make me feel good, right? That's immediate. So this gets into, of course, something that we're talking about with people generally. And I think people generally, this is true of humans, we seek pleasure, we avoid pain. That is a consistent thing that you can say with human beings across the board. Would you agree?
I agree.
Okay. So, are you an exception to that, would you say?
I would have to say it depends.
Okay. Because I'm the same way. I would say it depends too.
It depends on the situation. I can't just say I seek pleasure, because I don't all the time. Because all pleasure is not good pleasure.
That's a good point. Yes.
You know, so it just depends.
Now, did your environment shape the way that you saw that? Because my environment certainly shaped the way that I saw that. So tell me about how your environment shaped your understanding of the seek pleasure, avoid pain thing.
Well, I can't even think right now.
That's okay. I'll tell you about mine, and then
Tell me about yours.
maybe that'll
help me bounce.
that'll judge.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, for my environment, so my mother, she struggled with alcohol. That was kind of she had that was something that was an issue for her, and for me, I noticed that with her, the challenge in her life. Anytime there was a challenge, she would it was a self-medication. So if she felt emotional pain, if things were stressful, if she felt anxiety, it was a social lubricant. It dulled the pain. It made her feel instantly better. And it was kind of a consistent thing that happened over time, that it would just continue down that road. Now, for me, I remember watching her I remember the kind of states. I would notice this change between states and how it was really hard for her to deal, like even at a very young age, I started to realize, oh, you struggle with dealing with pain and suffering and challenge. You would rather make that feeling go away. Now, I observed that because like you, so in my environment, I'm watching that. When she would drink, she would also be mean. And so because of that, it taught me, okay, so she clearly does this because it makes her feel better, but it changes her personality to such a degree that it makes her hard to be around. And on top of that, particularly when I'm a kid and I don't have control over where me coming and going, it becomes even harder, right? Now, as I got older, I had choices, and I could choose to leave, and I could extricate myself from the situation.
Right.
But my environment taught me, seeking pleasure in some ways was inherently a bad thing, particularly if it was to avoid pain. And so I became the kind of person, and it's part of the reason why I worked out the way I did. I worked out when I was 18. I think I've told this story before, but it's an interesting story. So when I was 18, I graduated from high school. Now, most of my friends, when they graduated from high school, they were super excited because they could party all summer. They were like, it's going to be the greatest. We're going to party every day all summer, right? That was their mentality. For me, I was super excited because I was like, oh my God, I can work out for 6 hours a day. I mean, literally, and I'm not even exaggerating. That's how many hours a day I worked out. I'd swim for 2 hours, and I would lift for 4 hours at a time.
No.
And so my whole thing was, I took that concept to an extreme. My environment taught me that embracing pleasure and avoiding pain, right? Seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, that was bad. So I was like, I'm just gonna go straight at the pain, and I don't care how badly it hurts. And so, and of course, it had this one benefit of I was enormous, right? Like I was huge. I was this massive guy. But it had this negative side to it because by going after pain constantly, in order to do that, if you're constantly doing that, you end up dulling all your emotions out. Because to deal with pain all the time like that, it ended up teaching me to suppress everything, which wasn't, in the long run, was very unhealthy.
Right. In
the short run, it allowed me to survive. I coped. I got really big and strong, right? So anyway, I would say that was my relationship with that growing up. So has that made you think about anything on your end of things?
Of course, and as you mentioned, we have so much in common because my mother too was a drinker. Mm-hmm. And growing up watching her drink, I tried to talk to her, like, Mom, don't do this, it's not good. Now, one difference is she wasn't a mean drunk, and she did drink to numb a lot of pain.
Yeah.
I know this just from sitting back and watching her when she drunk. So I had, family members that provoked it.
Yeah.
you know, to cause her to get upset. And when she got upset, she went to the bottom. And when she drank, she would drink it straight. You know, she would have like a regular drinking glass and it'd be half full. And when she got ready to drink it, she would drink it straight down with a waterback chaser.
Wow.
You know, and she would drink so many of that to the point where she just slumped over, went to sleep.
Wow.
You know,
And did you see that from the time you were young, or did that happen more progressively as you got
it
older?
happened more progressively as I got older.
Yeah, because that was the same with me.
You know,
Yeah.
young, I don't really see it because
Yeah.
my mind is all about playing.
Yeah.
You know, but as I got older and I saw it and then I noticed why it was happening,
Yeah.
you know, it hurted me to the core.
Yeah.
You know, there was one time when she was so out of it. My mother was I'm like barely over 100 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were coming back from somewhere. I was older, driving,
Yeah.
and was trying to get her into the house, and she fell down the stairs. My mother was a good 250 pounds.
Wow.
I literally, solo, by myself, had to pull my mother up the stairs, and it was maybe a good 7, 8 stairs, just to get to the porch,
Yeah.
and then pull her into the house. It was a struggle, but I that strength came from somewhere, because I did it.
Yeah.
And it was late.
And you were working out for 6 hours a day.
I wasn't working out for 6 hours. I wasn't even working out for 1 hour. But that was like a lifetime workout right there. You know, so I just observing, you know, the pain, you know, the pleasure that she thought she was getting from the drinking to kill her pain. That was my, you know, I'm not going down that path.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
granted, I do have a cocktail here and there.
Right.
But I know my limits. I'm not going to have a cocktail to the point where I need help.
Right. So your environment, it sounds like there's some similarities there. So your environment taught you, okay, don't use alcohol to numb out your feelings. Right? You can use alcohol to have a good time if you want. But if you're using it to numb out your feelings, particularly to the point where you're non-functional, that's bad.
That's very bad. That's you know.
So you saw that because you had to pick up the pieces around.
Yeah, I had to pick up all the pieces.
Yeah, and they were a lot. And heavy.
It was a heavy load.
Yeah. So
love my mother, you know, but
so that's and that's challenging to do to deal with that. So
it was very challenging because mind you, I'm like maybe early 20s.
Right.
You know, if I'm even in my 20s at this point.
Right.
You know, and just to see my mother go through that, you know, I know she was fighting demons. You know, I could see it.
Right.
You know, I could see it through her and I could see it around her. You know, it was hard.
Yeah, so I think to watch somebody do that and I think that shapes for us. Because when we're talking about your environment shaping who you are as a person, it shapes some of your choices that you made going forward. Did, for me, I think that one thing that really impacted me was, words, they always say, sticks and stones break my bones, but words never hurt me. That's total BS.
Yeah.
That's
because I know I stepped on several cracks in my mother's back.
Yeah. Like the words that she would say to me, particularly when she was drinking, they were cruel, very cruel often. And I can tell you that I realized, those words, I still think about them all the time. She probably doesn't even, she's passed away now, but she
probably would never remember saying it.
She probably wouldn't remember saying it. She wouldn't, and she would even deny that she would say it. I wouldn't say something like that.
Right.
I'm like, well, I can tell you I've never drank, and I can remember you saying them, but those things, they stick with you. And so a lot of my, when I was young, particularly probably into my early 20s, I couldn't even be around anybody drinking because it was it was a trigger. Oh right. Yeah, it really triggered me. It made me, and part of it was I associated. I didn't really have any model of moderation. Nobody that I'd seen in my life, because I told you in Virginia, heavy drinking culture. I had not seen anybody who just drank a beer. Right, or a cocktail, and then that was it.
No,
you drink 6, 7. Everybody's
drink. You chug a load.
You drink, and you drink a lot. So I had never seen that. So for me, I assumed well, that's just how everybody is, right? Because that was the whole culture that I grew up in. Now, over time, I started to encounter people who just drank normally, and I thought to myself, oh, okay, this is just there are people who can be moderate. But for me, my moral understanding of the world at that time, particularly in my early 20s, was drinking is wrong, you should never do it. And if you do, you're an evil person. like that was kind of how I thought about it. And so I'm wondering for you, I mean, clearly you didn't have quite that model.
No.
But what was some of the moral things that you came away with? I mean, it sounds like one, you weren't going to drink to excess, but were there other things that you took away that shaped and informed the way you were living your life in your early 20s?
Well, see, I was young when I became a mother.
Yeah.
So I was 14, so I had to grow up fast.
Yeah.
And doing that, I can honestly say there was a lot of things that a normal teenager experienced that I didn't experience.
Yeah, because you had responsibilities.
I had responsibilities. My responsibilities was going to school, if I had a job, going to work, coming home, taking care of my child, doing my homework.
Yeah.
That was my life.
For years,
For
I'm sure.
years.
Yeah.
For years. So I didn't really experience a lot of what my typical,
Right. Because if you're free of responsibility,
right,
you can make dumb decisions.
Right.
all the time.
I can be one of those kids that's going to the little house parties and on the weekend and trying alcohol.
Right.
To be honest with you, I didn't really try or indulge in alcohol until I was in my late 20s.
Yeah.
At that time I had all my kids and I had gained extra kids, and so I'm just I got a house full of kids, so I think that was something that I needed at that moment. I didn't start hanging out or going out with my friends until then.
Okay. So you had a high sense of responsibility.
Yeah, at a very early age.
Now, I'm sure you had friends though that were in your situation who weren't as responsible as you.
Yeah, I had a few.
Yeah.
I had a few. But,
that has to be a differentiator too, because you have a child, you're taking care of that child. That is you are focused on that. I had people in school who I went to school with who had kids too.
Right.
And I would say I knew one who was very responsible like you. I knew another who I was like, really?
What are you doing?
It was just and so I knew a lot of different people who had different ways of going about it. Now, I think it's interesting because as I got older, I got to know more people. I met more people in the world. My understanding of I had inherited an idea of how life was when I was young. Because I'd grown up in this environment, I thought, oh, everybody's this way, right? And then I started meeting more people. And so what I found was as I got older is that I softened a bit in my stance, which is I didn't think all people who drank were evil.
Thank God.
Thank you. And I realized, and I also had sympathy for people who used alcohol as a medication for their pain, which I didn't when I was young. And so what I noticed was my environment, and that's how my environment started to shift and change who I was. But part of it, and this is something I want to go back to, the softening, right, was that my environment, so this is we'll back it up, because I think this is an interesting question. We talk about potential. What is your potential as a person? And if anybody's on here watching, I'm really interested to know, because I think this is a fascinating question. What did you think your potential was when you were growing up? Like, how did you see your potential as a person? Because I think that something that influences us, right? Our environments influence our potential. My mom saying negative things to me, I felt that I had I felt like, well, I was stupid, I'm dumb, and I'm not going to amount to much, so I have to prove people wrong. So that my potential was in some ways limited by these words that were pushing me down.
Well, it's good that you were able to overcome that, because a lot of people would take that, that I'm dumb, I'm stupid,
Yeah.
I'm not going to amount to anything, and they live that life.
Right. So they come to embody that. That
Right,
becomes their potential.
Right.
So part of it though is that, like you, I'm an individual who wants. So I'm willing to go it alone, and I'm willing to say I'm gonna prove you wrong.
Right.
Right. So that's like something that's deep in me. I'm gonna prove you wrong. So in some ways that became fuel for me. Mm-hmm. But I had to I'm still, in some ways, I'm 45, and I'm still trying to overcome that in my life. Of those words are still kind of haunting me in the back of my mind. So you have a little bit of a different situation, though. You actually have your potential is now some ways limited by another human being,
Right.
who you have to care for. So it's not words that were said necessarily to you, but I have a physical responsibility that I now have to take care of my son all the time, right? So I think so I'm wondering for you, how did that impact your potential? And I know you would never sit there and say, "Oh, I wish I never had my son." You love your son, and I know you can't imagine your life without him, right? But how do you see that as shaping the potential in your life? Being that 14, you had to, deal with another human being and be responsible for that human being.
Well, of course, at 14, it's a very young age to become pregnant.
Yeah.
So for me, instead of becoming one of those statistics, like, oh, you're 14, you're not going to amount to anything, you're going to drop out of school.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Proving people wrong.
Prove them wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just going to be on welfare. No. Graduated high school and was working at the same time and taking care of my child.
Yeah.
So I was motivated. He was my motivation to prove people wrong, because like I said, so when I became pregnant, of course, basketball, sports, all of that's ended.
Yeah.
So.
That must have been hard.
It was. Even then, I had people, like playing basketball, I had people, like my English teacher, for example, because I'm short in stature. She was short also.
Yeah.
And that was the year I found out that I have scoliosis.
Mm.
My teacher also had scoliosis. So when she learned that I was on the basketball team, you got to take the physical. Mm-hmm. She persuaded my mother not to allow me to play basketball. Mm. I can say this now because my mother's not here.
Right.
I played basketball. I played basketball.
Yeah.
Some games I didn't go to.
Yeah, right.
But I played. But because of this curvature in my spine, my English teacher took it upon herself to basically make sure that I didn't pass. If you can't fail. If you fail anything, you can't play sports.
Wow. That must have been horrible.
It was. I got her back, though. But I left that school and I went to an alternative school. Didn't like that one bit because this school, it was different. It wasn't something that I really wanted to be in that environment, because you had all of these girls are pregnant. Mm. And a lot of these girls were, it's bad to say, pregnant by the same guy in this neighborhood. So they're fighting. You're pregnant and fighting. So for me, I had to get out of that environment too. Yeah. Because that wasn't a safe environment for me or my child. Yeah. So what I eventually did was I got into a school on the north side. I'm in Inglewood. Yeah. And I had to go on the north side, in the Gold Coast.
How long did that take?
What, the ride?
Yeah.
Maybe anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour.
That's on public transit?
On public transportation.
Wow.
But,
and you're pregnant while you're in the middle.
Well, no, this was after I was pregnant. This is post-pregnancy.
Okay, yeah.
Got a child in daycare or whatever. I go back to school, right?
Yeah.
This school, it changed me so much. It was the relationship you had with the teachers. It wasn't like, oh, Mr. Lang. It was no, hey, what's going on, Barbara? We had a personable relationships. Yeah. And the way the teachers talk to you, they talk to you as if you were a person. Mm-hmm. They talk to you as if you were their child. Yeah. So they're teaching you, you're getting your education, also kind of like making sure you do what you need to do to survive out there.
So it sounds like that environment was really important for you.
It was one of the best environments that I had.
In being able to
become who I am now.
Wow. And you started there freshman year, sophomore year? So you had 3 years in this, it sounds like a wonderful school environment with great teachers. And so was that a big way of you getting through that time when you were in school?
It was the school, it gave you freedom. It was a lot of freedom with the school. It wasn't your typical school. A lot of people at that time we had a rivalry with Jones Commercial, because our nickname was the school without walls.
Is that true? Were there no like classrooms?
We had classrooms, but a lot of our classes, we explored the city.
Oh, okay.
We had a science class at Indiana Dunes or the Lincoln Park Zoo.
So it was all experience.
Yes, it was experience. You had art classes at the Art Institute.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, that must have been amazing.
Oh my God, it was. So we explored the city.
Yeah. I think about that. I lived like an hour from DC, but to be able to go to the Art Institute, I never experienced anything like that.
I had a class at Lincoln Park Zoo, animal adaptation. So we were going to Tuesday. It'd be the last class of the day. So once you left class, you can go home.
Yeah.
But we did that on Tuesday and Thursday. We were in class for about an hour and a half to study or to go over what we went, our assignment from Tuesday. And the same thing with folks that went to Indiana Dunes. They had to be at school at 7 to get on the bus, and they come back at 5.
Yeah.
We had fun.
That's amazing. Well, so I think that what we're kind of getting to here, which is interesting because, I think that some people, they end up in a situation, and I read you're probably friends with some of these people, as am I. They were not born into good environments. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes people who are not born into good environments from the get-go, you're starting behind,
yeah.
Right? So everybody else is at the starting line, you're starting back because the environment is not conducive to your ability to just be a kid. You're not getting fed in the way that you should. Your parents maybe aren't as reliable. Maybe you're having to move a lot, whatever it is. And then, you're not getting the kind of consistency. Because I think that's something that you probably appreciate,
mm-hmm.
And that I appreciate is that, in spite of my mother's flaws, I will say the one thing that I had in my life that I knew I could depend on, it was consistent. I would come home, I knew I had a place to be. I knew I was getting food on the table. I had clothes on my back. There was heat when it was, cold in the winter.
Yep.
And it was, well, we didn't really have air conditioning, but, just
let the window open.
Yeah, but the idea was that stability was huge. And if you are in an environment where you don't have that from the beginning, and like I said, I certainly grew up with people who had that. The difference by the time we got to high school was that those people who, of course, when I was young, I didn't understand, I didn't know that that's what they were going through. But now looking back, I'm like, oh yeah. These kids who you sat there in school, and I don't know how you felt, but I certainly felt, I thought, well, I guess they just don't try, or I guess they just don't care, or whatever, right? Not realizing that actually that's 14 or 15 years of neglect that are now, what do you expect a kid to be able to just get it together? And right. it's the rare person who, in spite of their environment, they're like, I'm just going to do this no matter what, right? Because if that was the case, if it was true, and I think this is something that within our environment today, you've heard, I'm sure, the phrase, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
Like the bootstrap. So I don't know if you know, but originally that saying was supposed to be ironical because you couldn't actually, like, holding on to your bootstraps, you could never pick yourself up.
Right.
Like the whole point was that it wasn't like this idea of you being industrious. It was this idea of it was impossible to do. And the whole point was to show that in fact that most people who grow up in difficult environments don't make it.
Right. They can't get their life together.
They can't, and it's really, you know, I used to sit there and say, oh, I can't believe you, but now I look at it and I say, like, if anybody who does it, it's why they're revered so much. And they say, but the problem is people will look at somebody like that, you know, somebody who grows up in a really difficult environment, whether it be a really difficult urban environment or rural environment, and they sit there and they say, oh, look what the possibilities are in the United States, that you can become anything. It's like, no, this person is like a fraction of 1% of a lot of people who, frankly, if you don't have that system, that
stability,
it's probably never going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So I think this brings up an interesting question, which is, in your estimation, when somebody isn't given that in their life, and they didn't get to go to that school on the Gold Coast, right? They didn't have somebody who was boosting up their potential. They didn't have the food on the table. They didn't have those things. What do you think as an adult? Because I think this is, once it's happened, right, and you're into adulthood, you can't go back and redo it.
Right.
So it is what it is. I'm interested to know your take on, what do you think somebody needs who didn't have those things growing up to be able to find the potential of who they are? Like, how do they find that potential even though they weren't given all of that stuff when they were younger?
Sometimes you just need that right person to be in your presence and who has the patience to try to help you along. Now, everybody is not going to be able to accept, help, because they're afraid. They're afraid because they were never offered any help.
Right.
It's just like, okay.
Or they don't even know how to accept it when it is
exactly,
given to them.
exactly.
Yes.
So instead of them accepting it, they push it away.
Yeah.
I know several people that's like that. You can't force it on them. They gotta want it, and they gotta. If it's somebody in the backfield that has the patience to just wait, because they believe that you have the potential to change, to get better, and they want to see you get better.
Right. But here's the interesting thing, right? So I've done that for a lot of people who I've met who have grown up in those environments. And I say, okay, I'm going to be that person for you. But here's the interesting thing that I've found is that oftentimes, and this is true, particularly when I was younger, I wanted it more for them than they wanted it for themselves. And what I've noticed is that it's got to be the other way around.
Right.
Because if they don't want it for themselves, there's nothing you're going to do.
Exactly. Nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Until they want it.
So I think that's the thing that I've always struggled with is I agree with you. I think having just one person, you're absolutely right. One person can absolutely change the trajectory of your life. One person with love and care, like somebody just loving you in a way that you hadn't been loved before. That's a huge game changer for a lot of people. But I do think there's this interesting question of, okay, if I'm going to love you and just say, you come as you are, and I'm going to care for you as you are, but they're not really invested, or they don't have that investment, how do you inspire that investment in them? And the investment in themselves? I mean, really, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them to invest in themselves, which nobody ever did for them, so it's not shocking that they wouldn't do it for themselves, right?
So it's ironic that you asked that, because even right now, I'm going through something like that. I have this person that's in my life who I know that they can do better. But I know that they have to want it. And I've told them that. I've expressed to them that whenever you're ready, I'm right here. But I've done as much as I can, for you.
Right.
To show you that I want you better. I've pulled you into my home, tried to guide you and feed you the knowledge to get you where you should be. But with some people, it's the environment. The environment has taken control of them.
Yeah.
I don't want to be here because I'm used to being there. This
Yeah.
is what I'm used to. This doesn't feel comfortable for me.
Right.
You know, so you can't pull me from here and expect me to understand that.
Yeah, well, you're bringing up something really important, which is that the environment that you grow up in is often the environment that you recreate.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that happen a lot with people where they, you know, you talk about repeating cycles of, I mean, why is it that somebody who is abused when they're young, they end up
Being an abuser.
being an abuser or dating an abuser, right?
Right.
Like they recreate. It's very common for people to do that. And I think that the interesting thing is that I agree with you. I think that your point that you're bringing up is that if you want them to change as an individual, then the environment that they're in has to be fundamentally different. So I see this a lot with drug addicts. I think this is actually it's kind of a fascinating thing. I have this saying that you would change the environment, you change the person. And they will often say that when people are recovering from drug addiction, they will say, if you're in rehab and then you get let out and you go right back into the environment that you left from, the possibility of relapse is like super high.
Exactly.
It's like almost guaranteed that you're going to go back to it because the environment is shaping that. But if you get out and then you cut off all the friends who you had around, you move away from maybe toxic relationships, you start over in a completely new place.
Right, where you don't know anything.
Yeah, and you just have to figure it out. That person can often make it work. Could they relapse? Sure. Much lower possibility though.
Right.
Because the environment
has changed
and has shifted. And so, do you remember? And I like this example. I think it's an interesting one. Do you remember the "Don't Do Drugs" commercials from the 80s?
Yeah.
With like, this is your brain on drugs and all
you got
that.
an egg.
Yeah, the egg and you smash it. Do you remember the one they did where they showed the rat in the cage?
Do you remember that.
Where it was like the rat. He started like there's cocaine in the water bottle.
Yeah.
And he goes up to the water bottle and he like drinks it. Then he runs away and he comes back. And then eventually, like by the end of the commercial, at the end of the 30 seconds, he's dead.
Down.
Right? And he's so addicted. So what's interesting is that's known as the rat cocaine experiment, which was like this really interesting thing. This guy up in Canada, he saw that experiment and he's like, that doesn't make much sense to me because rats, the reason why we use them oftentimes is because they're like humans. They're communal creatures. Mm. And so he's like, the problem with that experiment was that they're in a cage by themselves. You remember in the commercial, it's by itself.
By himself.
And all it has to do is the cocaine. Like that's all it has. And like human beings, rats get bored very easily. And so he said, okay, I wonder if you take a rat that's addicted to cocaine and put it in, he made this like rat amusement park where it's basically like everything a rat would want, right? So it's like all of this, it's like fun wheels, but tons of other rats. So clearly like addicted to cocaine for like 50, 60 days, something like that. Puts it into the rat amusement park. And then there's 2 water bottles. One water bottle is laced with cocaine. The other water bottle is just regular water. Now, all the rats would try the cocaine laced one. The ones who weren't addicted tried it once, didn't like it.
Went back to the other.
The one that was addicted did use it, but very quickly after being in the rat amusement park, it tapered its use. And the whole point was to demonstrate, and he goes, if you see what happened there, once the rat was around its rat friends and felt community and felt like it was good, it didn't need the drugs and it was able to change its behaviors. Whereas when you're alone, which a lot of times drug addiction, for example, is isolating thing, you're alone, you're with all these people. And so I think that's something that's very interesting about that experiment is that it shows that something as horrible as a drug addiction that can just destroy lives,
right?
That it can be changed by the environment. And if you have the right people, so in our instance, right, it's not rats in an amusement park,
right.
But we need the right people. So and you're right, one person can make that difference. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 people in a whole different community who support you and love you, and that's I think where you can become somebody totally different.
Yeah.
And become different than who you are. But it takes that. And I think that's something, kind of the point of trying to do this is trying to build, I mean, it's online, it's not quite the same where you can go all the time. But part of the reason why we're here doing this is to show that we have a community of people who love and care for each other and want to be there for each other. And that in spite of your struggles, that when you go through something, we want to create an environment where you feel loved and cared for so that you can get to the other side. Because as you pointed out with your friend, there's only so much you can do personally. And I think what it would take for your friend to shift and change is you would need a whole group of people. And then some of those things that you're doing will have a bigger impact and a bigger effect. So I think that just like when you're pointing out what happened in that school, you had this whole group of people around you who changed the way that you thought and felt about yourself with the teachers. It wasn't just the teachers, I'm sure it was the students as well. And the same with me, where I was around whole groups of people who loved and cared for me and helped me to understand, oh, there's a different way of approaching this. So, I just want to say thank you for coming on and being here and sharing about your life. And, I hope that people feel, I hope you all feel like that from our experiences that you got something that you can take with you about how to live your life. Because if you're in a bad environment, I just want to say it because I think it's so critically important. If you are in a bad environment, an environment that's not conducive to you being the best that you can be, you need to change that. That's so important. And sometimes it's hard to do it because sometimes you can't just up and move and do that. I get that. But it's really a necessary thing. So please, if you find yourself in a really difficult situation, if things are not going well for you, if you're not living the life that you want to live, if you're not reaching your potential, work to change the environment, because I really believe if you change the environment, you change the person.
And also, I'd like to add to that, there is help out there for you. You do not have to do it alone. Only thing you need is that one person to start. And once you have that one person to start, there's nothing that can stop you. You have endless opportunities out there that's available.
So thanks for being here. It's always great to see you.
Always great to see you too.
And we'll be back next week. I'm gonna do one more of these and kind of see what happens, because I've been doing these for the last this will be 2 months full. So this may be my last one coming up for a little while. But I'm really glad that you could be a part of this one. I really appreciate the conversation.
I'm glad you called.
It's always lovely to have the opportunity to talk to you. Always very insightful. And wishing you all the best week. And, we'll be back next week with another Kokoro Live. And don't forget to check out those Kokoro conversations coming out on Saturday. You all be well.